I sure am glad to see you all this morning. That old north wind is just about taking my voice away. Either that or I'm growing up and my voice is changing, whichever way y'all look at it. We started last week talking about Bible authority. We didn't finish it. We got started. And we'll try our best to finish it today. We talked last week about the realm of faith, the realm of the gospel, the Lord's faith, His teaching. I'm going to move on this morning to another phase of this study. And first of all, we'll talk about, is that on the board? I can't turn around and look. We'll talk about the realm of expediency. It goes along with the realm of faith. So this is not a complicated idea, but it is one that will involve our thinking to make sure we keep some things clear in our mind. Can you hear me better? Good. The realm of expediency goes along with the realm of faith. Some things are presented to us specifically in the scriptures, and some things are presented to us in general terms. Specific and general, two different categories. And we're going to talk about the general categories this morning. General instructions always require expedience. Yes?
Click that bell.
Now, as a for instance of what I'm talking about, go back to Noah again. We'll talk about Noah for just a minute. Genesis 6, God told Noah to build an ark. Told him the measurements to build it. He was very specific in his instructions to Noah. Build the ark. Now, you all will understand this. That was a sort of a general instruction because he did not tell Noah what kind of tools to use to build that ark. Had to have tools of some kind. It would have been impossible for him to do what God told him to do without providing some tools. But God did not specify the tools. And as the result of that, he left it up to Noah's judgment. Now, what I want you to understand is this word require. The tools were required. Absolutely impossible to do what God told him to do without having some tools. So whatever tools Noah chose, God authorized. They were approved under that general instruction. Now, let's talk about the Great Commission for just a moment. Jesus said in Mark's account of it, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Well, there is a general aspect of that command. He told us to go, but he did not tell us how to go. However, it's impossible to do what God told us to do without providing some way of going. Now, some people in the early days went by boat. Somebody could say there's no boat mentioned in the Bible as a way of going, but they were free to use their own judgment. Today, perhaps instead of a ship, we'll go by an airplane, a jet. Maybe we ride in our automobile. Maybe we can use the newspaper. Maybe our judgment is we can use radio or television. So there's that general requirement, and we must expedite it. That's what the realm of expediency means. We must expedite the doing of it. I go to a preaching appointment in my automobile. God didn't authorize an automobile. There's not one mentioned in the Bible. But that automobile is approved under that general command. He authorized the best judgment we can use in carrying out his general commands. Now that's important for us to grasp, and it will save us getting complicated in a lot of different ways. Hebrews 10:25, we're told to not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. As you know, on the first day of the week, the disciples came together to break bread, an example that we should follow. But the Lord did not tell us how to carry that command out in this regard. For instance, where shall we meet? Well, the Lord didn't say where to meet. He just said in the Word that we're to assemble. Where, he left up to our judgment. So, in my lifetime, I've met with the Lord's people in a number of different places. The City Hall had an open auditorium. I assembled with the saints in that City Hall. When the church started here in Tupelo, for a good long while it met in the courthouse downtown. That was the best place they could afford to have. It was convenient, and it satisfied the Lord's requirement to assemble. Is it correct to assemble in a courthouse? Yes, it is. How do we know that? How do we know the Lord has sanctioned that, approved it, authorized it? Because it is an expedient to help us do what God told us to do. And we couldn't have done what he told us to do without that meeting place being provided. So I met several times out in the open air. The first time the church in Verona ever met together was in the front yard of a lady's house. And I drove that Sunday afternoon to be with them in that meeting. Is it okay to meet under a tree? Yes, it is, if that's the best place to meet. The Lord said meet, but He didn't tell us how to do it, where to do it. You get that? That's the realm of expediency. So, He did not tell us, for instance, on the Lord's Day, He did not tell us what time to assemble. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Well, the point is, that was something that was left up to the judgment of His people. And we decide the time on the Lord's Day when we will assemble. Several years ago, we took a poll of our folks here at Gloucester Street to ask them about their preference, about the time that was more convenient for them to meet on the Lord's Day. So, we had something brought to our attention we never thought of before. Most of the mothers with small children were almost unanimous in saying we prefer to meet for worship and then go to class. Well, that's the way we'd been doing it for a while. But the reason? Because their children, small children, were much more manageable at the worship hour if it came first than if they'd been supercharged in a Bible class and then brought to worship. We'd never thought of that, but mothers with small children thought about it. And the church started meeting at 9 o'clock a long time ago because there were times when they were without a preacher here and they had a preacher to visit with us before I came along. They had a preacher visit with us from one of the other congregations. So the preacher over at East Main could come over here and preach at 9 o'clock and then be back over there by 10. That's the reason they started at 9 o'clock worship, because it made sense. It was good judgment to do that. So, a meeting house, a church building. Now that involves a lot of things. It's an expedient to help us do what the Lord told us to do, that is, to assemble on our own property. Well, we could rent property in Tupelo and meet in some rented building. Chose to own our own property. That requires a lot of things, like having a license from the city of Tupelo. You don't read anything about license in the Bible, but it's authorized by the fact that the Lord told us to assemble, and He told us to use our judgment about the best place to assemble. So when we built a building, we had to have a deed. And in that deed, we had to name the owner of the property. That required us to put a name on the deed. The Church of Christ. Well, could we not have easily called it the Kingdom of Christ? Why, sure. That's a scriptural designation as well. A number of scriptural designations, but the deed required that we use just one. So all of that is in the realm of using the best judgment you can. And the Lord has authorized us to do that. although he has not specifically told us where to meet and what time of the day to meet. Sometimes people like to fuss about expedience, which is a waste of time. I like red brick, you like blonde brick. We're going to build a building. And so who's going to decide for us what color brick to use? We're divided 50 to 50. That's one of the reasons the Lord, in his wise judgment, provided for elders in the church. And so the elders must quite often use their best judgment about how to carry out some of the Lord's general commands. Y'all see that, I'm sure. This is not deep stuff. The expedients are authorized by the general instruction and require wise judgment. An expedient is authorized. We meet at 9 o'clock for worship. 9 o'clock is an expedient. We have to have a time. The Lord authorized 9 o'clock on Sunday morning because we had to have a time. And when we used our judgment, then that was authorized by God. Not difficult to understand. Now, I'm going to move on to that, to something else. And this will all perhaps tie together before we get through with it. Another realm, in addition to the realm of faith and the realm of expedience, is a realm of conscience. Paul said, I've lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. He never did violate his conscience. Although he did some things that were wrong, he never did violate his conscience. It's a wonderful thing that the Lord put in us something that we call a conscience. That's a compound word. The first three letters in it, C-O-N, mean with. And the last half of that word is science, conscience. And science means knowledge. So with knowledge, we proceed in our daily lives, not violating our conscience. Now, this is maybe a crude illustration, but maybe it'll get across. The furniture in our house is arranged, and I had very little to do with arranging it, but I was in perfect agreement that it needed to be arranged. So I know where every table and every chair and every stool and every couch, I know where all that is in my house. It's knowledge to me. I have knowledge of it. So that I can get up in the middle of the night and walk from one end of my house to the other and never turn on a light. Isn't that wonderful? Unless my wife moves some of the furniture, which has been known to happen. And all of a sudden, I run up on a table, and my shin is marked. I didn't have knowledge of that. That's a little bit about the way our conscience works. We've got our moral lives all arranged. And it works well as long as our moral life is in order. But if somebody moves something and I run into it, it's because my conscience didn't know it was there, and my conscience hurts me. So I may not know it's wrong to use a byword. I won't tell you what some of my bywords are. The Lord knows them, and I try to use them when I get frustrated, But when I use one of my bywords, it hurts my conscience, because I've got my world orderly. So I need to get that byword out of the way, so I'll know how to maneuver in my moral world just like I'll know how to maneuver in my house. That's the way a conscience works. And I'm glad we all have one. Matters of conscience deal with matters that are neither right nor wrong. Let me illustrate that for you. There are, from time to time, people in the Lord's church who cannot eat in the church building. They have been taught that you're not to eat at the church building, you're to eat at home. Now, if they were to be forced to come into the church building to eat, their conscience would bother them. And the Bible teaches us that we're to not violate our conscience. So what are we going to do about that person who won't join us in a meal inside church facilities? Well, we're not going to force him to violate his conscience. That'd be wrong. Hopefully we can teach him better so his conscience will let him do it. But if not, then we're going to be patient with that person. Now, let me read this verse in Romans 14 and verse 14. I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteems anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. That has to do with eating certain kinds of food. Back in the Old Testament, in the book of Leviticus, written to the Jewish people, the Israelites. It was a part of their law, the law that was abolished when Jesus died on the cross. But here's what their law said. If I can get my pages of my Bible to work. The Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parts the hoof is cloven-footed, and chews the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat. Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof, as the camel, because he chews the cud, but divides not the hoof. He is an unclean to you. And the coney, because he chews the cud, but divides not the hoof, he is unclean to you. And the hare, because he chews the cud, but divides not the hoof, he is unclean to you. And the swine, though he divide the hoof, and be cloven-footed, yet he chews not the cud, he's unclean to you. All of their flesh shall ye not eat, and their carcasses shall ye not touch, they are unclean to you. Now, if I lived back in the 1st century, and I was a Jew, and I have been taught under my religion, which came from God, that there are certain kinds of meat I cannot eat without sinning. Christ died and nailed that old law to his cross. He took it out of the way. That dietary restriction went with it, so that now I can eat pork, even though it's on that list of unclean meats. I can eat it now, but my conscience still bothers me when I eat it. So what about it? Well, the instruction is, don't violate your conscience. It's just a matter of conscience with you, but it bothers you if you eat that unclean meat. So that's what I'll do. I'll still keep myself from that kind of meat. But what about the other brethren who know better? They're going to let me continue to abide by my conscience because it's not something that's either right or wrong. If I eat that unclean meat, it's not wrong. If I don't eat that unclean meat, that's not wrong either. So it's not right and wrong, but it has become, for some, a matter of conscience. Now, I read that verse in Romans 14 a minute ago, and if I can find it, I'll turn and read it again. In Romans 14 and verse 14, Paul is dealing with this problem, and he says, I know and am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, that is, about these animals. But to him that esteems anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Violate your conscience? Don't do that, if it's a matter of conscience with you. But hopefully you have good sense enough to know that what bothers your conscience doesn't bother somebody else's. And they're free to do it. And you're not going to have a fuss over it. You're going to let that person whose conscience bother him refrain from taking part in that. And you're going, in your freedom, you know it's not wrong, you're free to eat it, as long as you don't cause some brother to stumble. So here's this realm of conscience. And there's some things tricky about it that, now look, I want you to put those 3 circles in your notes if you're taking notes. There's a realm of faith, which we've talked about. There's a realm of expediency, which we have talked about. And then there's this realm of conscience over here. It's important that we get some of these things fixed in our mind. Let's just suppose, for instance, here I am, and I decide that I think it would be good to put a piano in our worship. So somebody's going to ask me, how do you authorize that? If we're going to included in our worship, where is it authorized? Well, in days gone by, hardly anybody now, but in days gone by, people who use an instrument tried to authorize it in the realm of faith. Back in the 1920s, a gentleman named O.E. Payne, I think it's spelled with a Y, P-A-Y-N-E, wrote an article, booklet, trying to justify the use of an instrument in worship. And he said it belongs in the realm of faith. And so what his argument in substance was, the word to sing, I'll write this in English. That's a Greek word which is translated sing in our New Testament. Psallo. Mr. Payne argued that that word also carried with it the responsibility to use an instrument with your singing. Inherent in that word is an instrument. And that booklet became very popular. Until the folks who followed Payne realized what they had done, and that argument was dropped. I don't know of anybody who makes that argument now, for some simple reason. First of all, the idea to play an instrument is not inherent in that word. No Greek authority anywhere will tell you that. In the singing, in the Lord's assembly. But on a practical level, they realize what they've done. If that word includes both singing and playing an instrument, then on the Lord's Day, when we assemble for worship, we not only all have to sing, but since that's been authorized, we all must play an instrument too. Not just one person sitting at a keyboard, but everybody has to play an instrument if that word is correctly translated. So efforts to put that authorization in the realm of faith have come and gone, but mostly now they're gone. Let's move on to this realm of expediency. I want a piano. So what I'm going to say is the piano is nothing more than an expedience necessary for our singing. It aids the singing. It is an expedient. That defense of a piano became popular near the close of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. It's all it is an expedient. Like, for instance, the person who sings with false teeth in his mouth, or the person who has to use glasses to see the words on the songbook. Just like those are aids to help us, so a piano is an aid to help us sing. And that defense of the instrument became very popular and very strong for a number of years back in the 1930s. But after a while, when they recognized the weakness of that argument, that the piano is not actually an aid, it's an addition. It's something different altogether to the singing. That defense of the piano faded away. Now, so I still want a piano. So listen carefully to this. I talked to a brother in Christ about the use of a piano in worship, in the assembly. I asked him the question, is it wrong for our religious neighbors to use a piano in their worship? It's a very difficult thing for him to answer. So he says to me, do you think I want a piano? I have no idea that you do. And here's what he tells me, and you listen to this. He says, I have been taught all my life that it's wrong to use a piano in worship. From a very small child, I was brought up being taught that using an instrument in worship is wrong. My conscience won't let me do it. The reason I do not want a piano is because it offends my conscience. Y'all get that? Well, what if that person's conscience no longer hurts him if he worships with an instrument? Does that make it all right? According to that thinking, yes, it does. The only thing that's keeping it out is because it bothers my conscience. But if somebody will enlighten my conscience, then I can see my way clear to use it. So conscience now is a popular way among some folks who want to have an instrument in worship. Now, I've got 5 minutes before 11 o'clock. I don't know where the time has gone. I'm sorry about my voice, y'all. There's nothing I can do about it. I gargle, and I've got some of the messiest stuff I gargle with you ever saw in your life. One of my brothers told me about it, so I started mixing me up some of it with apple cider vinegar and honey and lemon juice, and it's hard to put in your mouth, but it does sometimes clear my voice enough. So, if I were in a gospel meeting, which I don't do as much as I used to, but if I were in a gospel meeting, I'd probably carry some of that with me to gargle with. Hey, listen, I'm glad y'all are here. David, would you lead us in a closing prayer, please?